We're gonna introduce Stefan, or we'll have Stefan introduce himself.
Okay, I'm in.
And you're spotlighted and you're good to go. So
Okay.
Go ahead, Stefan.
Well, I just would like to say hi to everybody. Thank you for coming to watch this clinic. I hope you take something away from it. This came up earlier, so in spite of my accent, I am not that far away. I am actually this side of the pond, this side being the American side. I'm actually based just outside Atlanta, just north of Atlanta. And so is my layout. In the background, you'll see there a picture of my layout. The scene there represents a bridge that actually exists on the prototype that goes across I-75. My I-75, of course, only has 3 lanes either side, whereas I think at the moment they're up to about 6 either side. Right there, but you know, we in model railroads we compress, and this is one thing I had to compress. So let me share my presentation. Hopefully you can see there, as was in the email that was sent out. I'm talking about using JMRI panels and also paperless manifests. And those are also, that's a JMRI feature. So before we get to that part, just a quick little introduction of myself here. I've been a on and off railroad modeler since my youth, sort of, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old. But I have to be honest, more off than on. I was introduced to model railroading by my grandfather and my father, who father kind of encouraged me, but we also got into things like slot cars and whatever. So I did some, you know, some modeling, not necessarily all railroad related. I carried boxes and boxes of stuff that I was collecting round and round and round. And as I approached retirement, I finally decided to have something to do in retirement rather than sitting around waiting for the inevitable. And I started out by joining a modular group called Country Railroads here in the north part of Atlanta. Those of you in the southeast that have attended some train shows, specifically the Piedmont Division's train show or the Easley train show, are a couple that we've been at. Asheville as well. Country Railroads, we have a kind of a Fremo based layout, and I was very honored to join them because they have a very high class of modeling, and I learned a lot from that. When it came time to build my own railroad, I had for a long time in the back of my head been thinking about, you know, what I would like to do, and I decided there is a line, kind of a small branch line that's very close by, and was actually kind of the first line that I saw when we first came to live here in the US. It's used to be known as the Etowah line. It goes from Marietta up to Etowah in Tennessee. And like I said, it was close by where we first lived when we came here. I just thought that would be nice to do. So before we go any further, and I don't want this to sound too much like an Oscars acceptance speech, but the model railroad hobby is one where everybody's always very friendly and you get a lot of help from people, but there are some people that I would like to give some credit to before we go into the presentation. Scott Sabo was one. I saw his presentation, which I think was in June of this year, on this virtual thing, and he talked about managing track warrants or block security using a JMRI panel in the dispatcher's office, kind of like a magnet board. The Southeast region was going to have a convention this summer, but of course, thanks to COVID, that had to be canceled. So they had a virtual one, and one of the sessions there was one by Steve Todd. Many of you will know him as Mr. Raspberry Pi. He makes an image of a Raspberry Pi that makes it very easy to set up and install a Raspberry Pi to do wireless throttles using iPhones and other smartphones. But he had a session on something slightly different, which was paperless JMRI switch lists. Now, I do want to use JMRI for my operations. I had set it up and I was playing around with that, trying stuff out. And I thought, this looks interesting. And as I did that, it kind of connected some things, and you'll see later on what happened. Also, I'd like to mention Tom Klimoski, because he's basically the guy that got me interested in operations. I was never one to really want to run trains in a circle and watch them. And I got to know him because he also models the same line that I do. We're two different eras, but I got a lot of useful information from him, and I went up to see his layout, and we did some operations there, and that basically hooked me in there. And then there's lots of other people. You know, this hobby is just so friendly. Everybody helps everybody, but I really wanted to mention those three names. So let's have a quick look at the prototype. The prototype started out as a narrow gauge line at the end of the 19th century, which means it has tight curves and steep grades, but it was very quickly changed into a standard gauge line. It is also known as the hook and eye division. The eye was a loop where basically they replaced some switchbacks up a mountain and just had the train go around the mountain, cross over itself, a la Techapi route. And you can see a picture there. It goes over a trestle, and it's just I think goes around 1.5 times before it actually crosses over itself. Very interesting. The hook was a tight reverse curve a little bit further south down the line. That's no longer in existence, although there is a switch and kind of a siding where they store cars that goes off for part of it. The key products on the line were originally marble and then later copper. Up in Tennessee, up on the border between Georgia and Tennessee, was a large copper mine. So copper, marble, grain, and passengers. There are other industries along the line, but those were the main ones. It was part of the L&N. The L&N became part of the family lines. Family lines became part of CSX, and CSX sold it to the Georgia Northeastern at the end of 1986. My era is actually the last few months of 1986, so I'm still operating in the CSX time frame, and you can see the other little picture down on the right there, a seaboard train of the family line livery at Tate, which is the station nearest the marble mines, going down through there. Key elements on the line, well, I mentioned the loop and trestle of the Hiawassee Loop, and today that's actually there is a scenic railroad that you can ride to see that, a very interesting trip. There is the Turnip Town Creek trestle. That's also a fairly high and very long curved trestle. Curved trestles are fairly rare, and this one happens to be a curved trestle. The Little River Bridge is an interesting one. And then you have Copper Hill, McKaysville. It's where the copper mine is, and those two names are, it's one town, but it has two names because the Copper Hill is the Tennessee side and McKaysville is the Georgia side, but it's one town. It just has two different names. In addition to the marble mines, there is also the Georgia Marble had a Nelson plant. And the interesting thing about that is that the rail line actually goes right through the middle of the plant buildings. There's still a gantry crane over the track. There used to be a number of sidings there. It's now just the main line goes through there. And then there's a fairly large grain processing at Pilgrim's Pride in Canton. That's also still rail served. If you want more information about the line, you can Google it. And Thomas Klimoski that I mentioned earlier, he did an NMRA-X presentation on 26th of September. If you look that up on YouTube, you can find out more about the line. The Georgia Marble Railroad was a private line that basically came from the mines and interchanged at Tate. There were 2 mines on that line, and a third one that's actually on the main. It's up at a place called Whitestone, if you're from this area. Those 3 mines still exist and are still rail served. What's interesting about the 2 mines on the branch line, you need to go on a switchback to get to the mines. Now, most places I've ever looked at switchbacks, they're almost always, you go from the main line up to wherever you need to go. In this case, it's actually the other way. The main line is up on kind of a ridge along that part of Georgia, and the mines are down in a valley, and so the line actually goes down there. Georgia Marble Railroad had their own switches, a couple of them. Well, actually more than a couple. At one time, there was also a GE mid-cab apparently up at their Nelson plant. But you can see it's not too clear, but they had this nice light blue and white livery that you can see on the switcher there. I found some pictures of this SW1 switcher that they had, and have tried to replicate that. Not 100% prototypical, but still the paint scheme, etc. The line itself was actually acquired by the GNRR in the 90s. So GNRR, the Georgia Northeastern came into being at the end of 1986, and I think in the early 90s they also took over operations and still do operate down to the mines. Eric, if any questions come up, I'll take a little break between sections. Feel you know.
Okay. Carl Bloom's asking, is the line near the Georgia Guidestones?
No, it isn't.
Okay.
No.
And Copper Hill, McKaysville, is this town involved in the state line controversy from not following the exact border that was specified by the feds? The border was supposed to be a specific latitude line, but somehow stuff got shifted south of the actual line.
It's somewhere up there. I'm not sure whether Copper Hill, McKaysville was involved in that. But I do know somewhere around there was some controversy at some point in time.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, there is a place in the town where there is a river which designates some of the border, but there's also a place in town where there is just a big red line on the road, and one side is, it has the letters TN on one side and GA on the other. But it's kind of an interesting town to visit. Yeah.
Somebody's asking, what are you using for flooring? It looks like in the picture.
Sorry, what am I using for?
For your floor, some sort of laminate.
Oh, yes, it is a pine laminate.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so that's the prototype. So just a little bit about the layout, and the layout is under construction. It's it's still in very, very early times. So a lot of what I've done with operations is either a very short piece, or some of it is virtual operations. But anyway, so it's under construction. It's going to be mainly double, but sections where it will have triple deck. I mentioned some key elements of the prototype, and so I will have the loop trestle. I will have the Marble Hill switchbacks, and you can see the switchbacks on the picture in the bottom right-hand corner there. They're actually prototypically a 4% grade, and the tails at each end can take 4 or 5 cars. I've reduced it, I think, down to 3 cars in the locomotive. Again, we compress space. I will have the 3 Georgia marble mines. So 2 you'll go down the switchbacks, and then it'll go around to a peninsula, and there'll be 2 mines on there. And then the Whitestone mine is also going to be on the main. I will have the marble plant with the rail line going through the marble plant under the gantry crane. I think that's just such a nice thing. At the end of, on the left-hand picture, at the end there, I hope it's large enough, you can just see in the distance, you can see the little river bridge, again, compressed in size and space. It is actually a straight bridge. I've had to make it a curve. And then I will also have the Copper Hill mine. There are other kind of things that I've picked up from the prototype and either made a representation of or copied in some way, but those are the key ones. So it's, you know, it's still being built. After the picture on the right there, I've actually added some extra sections there, but it's still very much being built. It is one that is designed for operation. So it's point to point. It's going to be quite long because it will go all the way kind of round the room. My room is about 26 by, I think about 22 feet. My aisles are relatively narrow. A lot of people say, oh, make the aisles as wide as possible. They are a little narrow, but I wanted to do that so I could get all the elements in that I wanted. So I'm not really designing it for run-bys and watching trains run, although the long run from Copper Hill back to Etowah, which is more or less the upper layer, does not have a lot of switching, does not have a lot of siding. So there's a bit more of an ability there to you know, let things run and also watch the trains rather than operating. My mainline turnouts will all have locks. You can see a box down there with a knob, and they will be operated manually, but they will have locks on them, and the crews will have master keys. I found on eBay you can order sort of a batch of 30 or 40 small locks, all with the same keys, and that's what I'm going to do, and then provide each crew will have one master key that they can use to open that. The master keys will also be used for siding gates. So some of my sidings, certain industries will have gates. My friend Tom Klimoski, who you see on the left-hand picture, that was my inaugural operating session when we basically operated from the interchange into the Marietta Industries and back. He came up for that. His layout, the Georgia Northeastern, he also has gates, and I stole that idea from him. The locks on the mainline turnouts, I believe, comes from Lance Mindheim. Siding turnouts are all manual and just finger flick, so they're sprung loaded. I use Pico track, and they're finger flicked, so that, and to me that's, you know, not having it all electrically done is a little more realistic, because when a crew goes down there, the conductor, you know, on the prototype would get off and actually move the switch. So we're doing the same thing on the layout here. And to help operators, I've put track plans on the fascia. You can see the Marietta track plan there. For those that are interested, that track plan is actually made. My wife has a Cricut craft cutter machine, and I cut the track plan from white vinyl, stick it on there. The lettering, Marietta, is also cut from that same vinyl. You stick it on, and then I use an Epson or a Brother P-Touch printer to do the smaller text, because the Cricut is not so good at small text. So I use that and stick it on those white track sections there to say what is what. But it means, you know, if you've got a new operator, you've got a new conductor or engineer, and you tell them, go drop off this box car or this bulkhead flat at Capital Supplies, Building Supplies, they can find that very easily on the fascia. So that's the layout. Any questions on that before I move on to the meat of the presentation?
No, go ahead.
Okay, we will go on. So I mentioned earlier, I saw the presentation that Scott Sabo did, and basically, for those that haven't seen that, he was using it in his dispatcher's office as a magnet board. So he had all of his track in there, and he would, when a train was ready to leave, they would call him up in his dispatcher's office, or call the dispatcher up on the phone system that he had installed, and get clearances to the next waypoint, whatever that was. And then the dispatcher would mark that on the magnet board so he would know what's going on. When I first saw panels in JMRI, I thought, well, you know, and these have sensors and everything. I thought this was going to be something that you use when you have your layout automated and you've got block occupancy sensors and everything, and you want to see, you know, on a screen where your trains are. I hadn't thought of using it as a magnet board. When I saw that, I thought, oh, that's a great thing, because basically the branch line that my line was in 1986, which is when I set mine, it wasn't a big main line. So I'm pretty certain they would be using verbal block security or track warrants or whatever, you know, basically authority to move into certain blocks of track. So I thought that would be a nice thing to use. So I started playing around with that. In my plan, I'm not expecting to do like Scott does, have a phone system or radios and just do verbal communication with the dispatcher. I'll see how that goes. It can always be added later. The panel provides visual confirmation of clearances. In the picture on the right, you can see there's a big screen inside the train room where this panel is reflected. Behind that screen, that's or to the side, there's a door, and that leads to what is amongst other things, the dispatcher's office. It's also some other things, but the dispatcher sits there and he sees that same screen, so he can see what he has provided clearance for. Scott Sabo had forms that basically, you know, like the prototypes do. The dispatcher would say, "You're cleared to this," and you know, do this, do that. And then the engineer or the conductor would write that down and then relay that back. I'm trying to keep it simple, so I don't think I'm going to do that. But again, that could be added at some later point. Or maybe I just do it for the dispatcher. Now, in the Scott Sabo version, JMRI allows you to add a marker, and the markers can be generated from your JMRI roster. It'll take the engine number, and that's basically, the marker is just a kind of an icon that you can move around the screen, so that as you provide a clearance, you also know, you know, which locomotive, i.e. which train is there. So and just very quickly, you can see there, if I was standing in the aisle there, we can see that chassis system. It's actually a locomotive 6574, and you can see kind of a yellow thing there. Well, I'll show you the big screen. So here we are. This is what you see up on the TV screen, and this is what the dispatcher sees when he has aligned thing. And you see these dots that are in there, those are in JMRI terms, those are called sensors, and they are a manual way of indicating whether a block is occupied. So if you look at the situation here, I have locomotive 6611 in the Elizabeth Yard, has clearance up to and including Marietta. They're going to do some work there, so you can see it says working. They're going to do some switching, while 6574 is in the siding at Tate, but is cleared through to the Little River and just a little bit past, so through to Woodstock, and will have to hold outside Marietta until the switching at Marietta is completed. So just quickly about the different colors I have here. So the white track is track that's available, has not been assigned to a train. The yellow track has been allocated to a train, and you can see the marker there. Remember, the markers in the original version are manually moved. So if you're going to change anything, the dispatcher would pick this up and drag it to the new location. The green box is when you reserve a block for switching. gray track I have up here, I designed my panel with the full layout, so that's future expansion, isn't in use at the moment. And blue track is, which you can see here, it says JMRI overpass on a couple of the sidings there. Blue track is served by the Georgia Marble Railroad only. They, on my layout, they will have trackage rights from Tate to Whitestone and to the Nelson plant. The mines themselves start, the track goes down the switchbacks, which start at where it says GMRR overpass, basically goes down there. That whole Georgia Marble part is basically a black hole for the CSX dispatcher. So for the main line, that's up to Georgia Marble to sort out for themselves how they run their trains there. Only when they come up the switchbacks and are just outside Tate, they will have to stop and then request a track warrant to either go into Tate to switch or go to the other two locations to pick up or drop off cars. So now the panel has changed a little bit because 6611 finished its switching, was told to hold in the passing siding in Marietta. 6574 was given clearance on the main through to Marietta and then through to Elizabeth. So it's reached Marietta. You can see the 6574 icon has been moved to Marietta, and the 6611 shows that that train has also reached Tate and now will very likely be switching. So that's all done manually, but as I said before, the crews can see, you know, where they're supposed to be, how far they can go, what track has been allocated to them as they are working. So very quickly, how was it set up? Well, it was set up using the JMRI panel editor. It took me, I have to say, probably 3, 4, 5 or 6 evenings playing around with it to really get comfortable with it. There is a bit of a learning curve. I tried once or twice before and got discouraged, but after seeing Scott Sabo's presentation, I decided I had a real need for it. So I forced myself to learn it. And after a while, now I'm pretty comfortable with it. So all of those track sections are assigned to a block. The blocks have colors assigned to them. A block can have 3 colors, but only 2 are used, unoccupied and occupied. Because I'm using the manual sensors, basically it's either on or off, so I can't use the 3rd color. And like I said, because this panel is not attached to the layout in any way, I don't have any block occupancy sensors. I am using these sensor buttons purely manually. If you want to set up something like that, here's something took me a while to find out. If you want to create a block, you do a right click on a new track segment or on a turnout, and then you can create or edit your block there. Once you've set it all up, one of the things you will find when you first start up JMRI and it calls up the panel, it actually sets all of the sensors and the turnouts into an undetermined state. That's kind of the 3rd state that the block can have for the colors, undetermined. I didn't want that. I want to have everything set to available on the track and the turnout set to the main line. So what I did there, I used a route and that's a Panel Pro route, just so you don't get confused, or probably you will get confused. Operation Pro also has routes. It's not that, it's a different kind of route. And what you can do is you can set up a route which tells JMRI to set all the turnouts to closed and the track segments to unoccupied. And then you run that route when you first start up. So you load the panel and then run the route in your startup settings. Everything comes up as you need. And by the way, looking at the panel, one other thing that people may ask, you see some of the turnouts just seem to go off the main and don't go anywhere. The reason for that is while there are yards behind there, I'm not keeping track of trains in yards. So I decided not to actually put the yards on the panel, just the just the turnout that is the entrance to the yard. Okay. And in order to get the work rectangles, so when you're working a particular location where you have a number of sidings, etc., that's a special block, and the sensor icon, the button that you see in the track there, is actually replaced with text. You may have noticed it either says work or working. That's text, and when you change the state, it changes the text from work to working. Thick tracks are the main line. Thin tracks are what JMRI calls the sideline or siding, passing sidings, etc. Lessons learned. Start slowly. Build a simple panel first. Just put a couple of straight tracks, maybe a turnout or two. Do that first, and then build from there. Read the relevant JMRI help sections at least twice, and when something doesn't work the way you expect it, read it again. I have to say that sometimes the JMRI help text is difficult to work your way through, but it is worth the fight, because at the end of the line, it almost always does tell you what you need to know. If it doesn't and you really get stuck, you can use the JMI forum. There are a lot of very helpful, very friendly people there that can often find the solution and tell you how you can do what you want to do, or if they may even tell you, no, you can't do that because that's not the way it works. When you're building your simple panel, not so important, but once you start building a panel for your layout, store them often. Now, store panels is a function in the panel editor, and basically it means save. The reason they don't call, there are reasons why they don't call it save. It's you know, I won't go into that, but so use the store panel function often. One of the nice thing is it automatically makes a date time stamp backup. So if you're going along and all of a sudden you realize you messed up, it is actually easy to go back 1 or 2 or even 3 steps and say, okay, no, what I did there isn't right, I have to go back. And you can do that quite easily. One mistake that I made was to create a separate profile to test. Again, for those of you that know JMRI, you can set up different profiles. I thought it would be easier to set up a profile to make a test panel and then move it across. Moving panels is almost always complicated. Just do it in your main profile for the layout. It just keeps it a lot simpler. Another thing I learned was the panel has a zoom feature, so you can actually set the size of the panel depending on, you know, how much track you have, how big you want things to be. Do you want it to go across 2 screens? I know Scott Sabo actually has 2 screens. It's a very wide panel, but it goes across 2. But you set a particular zoom value. So mine is not at the, if you like, the default zoom value. I zoom in a bit. I was able to squeeze everything in and can zoom in. But occasionally that zoom value gets lost. Don't worry about it. Just do a rezoom and then do a new store, and it'll be there for a while and until you do something which loses the zoom. I haven't found out what that is, but like I said, I'm not too worried about it because it's quite easy to correct. So that's pretty much how I got to a place which was pretty much equivalent to what Scott Sabo had done. Anybody have any questions about this? Eric?
There's a couple questions here from Don Wilhoit. Is train direction determined by odd or even numbers, or is it first come, first served?
Well, on this manual one, it's based, the icon is based on the locomotive number. So that's, so numbering trains, that's, you know, but you can put anything in that icon. The default is loco number. If you wanted to put a train identification, you could do that. And how you identify trains is totally up to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Ken is asking, not sure how you can tell where the end of a TW track warrant is versus the other train. The first slide is unclear. The second slide, I see the break between them, but confused by the white middle.
Okay.
Switching.
So basically, the white middle means that that track, that block is not assigned. So that's the break between.
Okay.
So basically, if the track is colored, it's assigned to a train. Now, I have to agree, it's not perfect because it doesn't necessarily show exactly who or what. Now, there are some things in JMRI that you can actually do colors by direction. So if your train's going, and I have basically a north-south main line, so I could have it that instead of just being white and yellow, there are ways to do that. I could perhaps say, okay, if it's red, I'm going north, and if it's yellow, I'm going south, or something like that.
Yeah. This ties into Burr's question about, can you give the train icon a direction? The answer is no, but what you could do is do like what I'm doing here in the chat. So like if you use some carrots, you know, say,
well,
you can put that as the train number if you create it by hand.
Yep.
So that's one option, but generally, no, the train icons do not have directions. You just create them and you drag them around.
Well, there's a couple of things, Eric. So one other thing that you can do in this manual method, and there's going to be something different, but in this manual method, you can choose the color of the icon. So when you create an icon, you could say, okay, red is a southbound train and yellow is a northbound train.
Yep, I do red for my CPs, and you can do green or another color for BN or something.
Yeah, and whatever. There are about 8 different colors.
Yeah.
I don't use all of them because I'm actually partially colorblind. So
okay. Yeah, that's the one thing about, I do actually have detection set up on my layout using this. And while it will show you that the block is detected, that having that marker to drag further lets you tell where it is, because the transponding just isn't there yet. So let's see. Bruce asked, do crews have access to the JMRI panel? I replied that I think you said the JMRI panel is displayed on a large screen in the TV in the layout room, correct?
Yeah, so the dispatcher is the one in this manual version. And I'm going to show you something else in the next section, but in this manual version, basically the dispatcher is using this as a magnet board, but you know, in Scott Sabo's case, only the dispatcher sees the magnets. In this one, I wanted to share it with the crews. And the other thing is when we have open houses, and some of you may have heard of the Piedmont pilgrimage, you know, and having an open house and having a lot of visitors, it's also a nice way for visitors to see where trains are and moving around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the links for the Piedmont pilgrimage are out in the chat, as well as a link to the groups.io page.
Yeah. The Piedmont pilgrimage is virtual this year.
Yep. Yeah, it's on. I've got the YouTube link out there.
Yeah. And my layout was actually highlighted yesterday. So if you go to the link, you should be, if you want to see my layout a little bit closer, I'd be very happy for you to go there, and you know, if you like it, feel free to leave some comments.
Yeah. Okay. So you got about 15 minutes left, so I'll let you continue.
We're going to rush through here, right? So, like they say on the TV, but wait, there's more. We're going to automate those markers. Okay. So, and this comes down to paperless manifests. Now, if those of you that use JMRI operations will recognize the manifest on the on the left, sorry, also known as switch lists. I use the official JMRI term manifest, although most people call them switch lists. Basically, it's a list of what you have to do at each location, right? Each yard, each siding and everything, drop off, pick up, etc. It's paperwork. You need a clipboard. You have to have a pen, place to put the clipboard, etc. And it's nice because it's very prototypical. I've seen ones that the Georgia Northeastern uses through my friend Tom Klimoski, and they look very similar. So that's nice. But because the Southeast region convention was canceled, they had a virtual convention, and one of the sessions on there was one by Steve Todd, and he talked about basically going mobile and using paperless train documentation. Now, of course, you know, using a tablet or a smartphone is not prototypical for my era, but it does, I think, make it easier for operators. It can be run alongside traditional paper documentation, so an operator can choose, do they want a clipboard or do they want to use a phone? And what it does, it uses the conductor function in JMRI. The server should run on the same computer used to run JMRI. Well, I have a computer where the dispatcher is running the panel, and that's where the trains are also built. So, yep, it's in the same area where the layout is, so we can use smartphones to connect to that. And the nice thing about it is when the train crews use this function, location of freight cars is updated immediately. If you use a clipboard and you check them off, only when you get the clipboard back can the dispatcher sort of say, okay, everything is done. But with the smartphone, it works. So I saw this presentation by Steve Todd and I said, that looks like interesting. And I'll set it up in my JMRI that I'm playing around with while I'm building the layout and see how it works. And while I was setting it up, I noticed something about placing a marker. So I went in and researched that, and I found out what it can do. It can place a marker on the panel, and based on the location that the conductor is saying the train is in. So while you're not actually connected to the layout, you are getting some feedback from outside the dispatcher's office of where a train is. Now, going back to one of the other questions, the interesting thing is instead of a locomotive number, it's actually using the train name. But again, you can use your own rules for how you make a train name, but it does do that that way. So here's the view on a mobile device, and this is on a smartphone. If you're on a tablet, it's a little bit bigger, but I do this on a smartphone, and I've got a number of those $20 smartphones that you can buy, you know, the burner phones. They don't have a big memory. They don't have a huge chip that can do a lot of processing, and they don't need it. There's no SIM card in there, so they can only connect via Wi-Fi, which is perfect. And at $20 a phone, it's a lot cheaper than one of those Digitrax or NCE things that are 200 or 200 plus each. So I find that's nice. So on the left, you'll see there's a train that is ready to go. You can see the name is Z001. And then on the right, this conductor has clicked on that train and picked up the train. It says, okay, you're in Elizabeth Yard. Your next location is Marietta. And the pickup here is, and obviously Elizabeth Yard is the interchange. So there's no set outs for this train. It's just starting. It's only pickups. Here are the things that you need to pick up, and it tells you from which track you will pick everything up. And you do this on your smartphone. So here's what's on the panel. The dispatcher has given clearance through to Marietta and said, Z001, you're cleared to work Marietta and drop cars off there, but it's still in the yard. So now the conductor says, okay, we've picked up the locomotive. We've attached all the different freight cars that need to go north in this one. And he will click on the blue, move to Marietta button at the bottom there, because all the check marks are in. So he's done everything he needs to do in the yard. He is ready to go. And then what magically happens is JMRI says, oh, Z01, as you see over there, has moved from Elizabeth Yard and is now in the Marietta Yard area. Now, the dispatcher, once it sees that move, if there's no other train coming, can then prepare the next track warrant or verbal block authority, whatever you want to call it, and say, okay, I'm going to let them go. Once they finish switching in Marietta, they will be free to go to Tate. And, if they need to drop something off in Woodstock, although Woodstock is a facing point, so that it only gets served on southbound trains, so they wouldn't do that. But they'll go through to Marietta. So that piece of track now from Marietta all the way up to Tate is assigned to Z001. So what do you need to do? Well, in Operations Pro, you need to add the panel name. And it's in the Operations Pro settings. It's in the main settings screen. If you look at the help text there, it'll say, do not use the file name, just put in the panel name. The other thing is that it will do, you can have 6 different colors for the marker. So instead of you having to choose a color, you can assign the colors yourself. So I have my main line runs north and south. So I have the color for northbound trains. They happen to be white. So it's easy to remember. If you're going north, you might be, well, not in Georgia, you'll be going to the snow, but still, white is towards the snow, and south is gray, no snow when you're going south. East and west, what I've done, I've actually said, okay, my Georgia Marble trains travel east and west. So I have a different direction. And so east and west are both blue. So when I have a Georgia Marble train come, that marker will automatically be blue. If you have a switching job, not a train that's doing the switching, but actually a switcher train, which only moves cars around in one location, that's a JMRI function, it can have a different color. And then once you terminate a train, again, that's an Operations Pro thing, it will change the color from either white or gray to the terminated color. So how do you set it up to actually move the marker? Well, it's actually in the routes part of Operations Pro, and you'll see there is a way to input train icon coordinates for each location. Now, what you will find, there's more than one set of coordinates, because you also have coordinates for different directions. So I have different coordinates for the icon when a train's going north and a different one for going south. The reason for that is if they overlap, for example, in Tate, there's a passing siding. If I have a northbound and a southbound pass each other there, I don't want the icons in the same place. So I set the icons for the northbound trains to the left, so the north side of the sidings of that location, and the southbound ones to the south or to the right. You can actually overrule XY by route for a specific location. If you have a different route, you can set defaults, but you can also overrule it on a particular route, because you may have a train that's following another one. And again, you don't, so you may, if you've got 2 northbound trains and one passes, one stops in the passing siding and the other one stops in the main and passes by there, you don't want the markers to overlap. So you can do that. Just read the help documentation for more information. So very quickly now, some lessons learned. Define your routes in Operations Pro without coordinates. then go in and use the place test icons to confirm that coordinates are correct when you do it for a particular location. You can do it for a particular location, and then you can use the update routes function. And what it will do is actually add that location to any route that uses that location. That's very useful. You can also say save location coordinates. So that is then a default. If you create a new route and say, okay, this route, this operations route uses Tate as a location that it goes through, then it will pick up the default, so you don't have to go in and redefine everything. Keep your train name to 6 characters or less. Why is that? Because the marker, once you do more than 6 characters, the characters start expanding outside the marker and it just looks messy. So mine are 4 characters. That works perfectly. And just so happens to be I have a little handbook that I picked up at the swap meet from the CSX of round about that period, and they did have train IDs that was 1 alphanumeric character and 3 numeric. There is a setting which says append local number. Don't do that. That's going to just make that whole thing longer. And after clicking the move button on the smartphone, wait for up to 20 seconds for the marker to move, or click on the panel away from anything, but to refresh the panel. I was told by one of the gurus in the forums that there is coding in JMRI that is supposed to move the marker slowly from one location to another. It does not work for me. It just sits there for 10, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, sometimes 15 seconds, and then all of a sudden jumps. Okay, we're got about 4 minutes for questions. The first one that may be there, can we get a copy of this presentation? Well, obviously this is a virtual presentation, so I can't give you pieces of paper. There is a link there on this. If you want to write that down, I kept it fairly simple.
Yep.
You can go
Stefan,
to this presentation. And
if you can send me that link, I will add it as another link on the past meetups page, so people can get your presentation.
yeah, okay.
All right.
I'll send you the other links as well. The paperless manifest, so a bit more detail about that.
Yeah.
Steve Todd's presentation, that's a YouTube, and Tom Klimowski's layout and history you can find at that link as well.
All right. Before everybody, we've got a couple of questions, but before people start clocking out, if you could take 1 minute and answer my quick survey here about the next event. It's scheduled to be the 20th or the 22nd, which is the same week as Thanksgiving. And if people are going to be busy and so on, then we're just going to skip that one, but I'd like everybody's input. So just click the Google Docs link and give me your input. Working back through the questions, it looks like we got the answer on how to get the conductor. Okay, do the engineers OS in each town as they move along the road? And it sounds like as they're hitting how do they basically tell the distance? I kind of have the same question. Do they have permission to go to places and then they go, and then that's what updates the panel?
So
just kind of, is it all basically yard limits?
I'm basing it on locations. Scott Sabo does it based on mileposts. I'm basically doing it on locations, although there may be, once I get the full layout up, there may be 1 or 2 exceptions, like I may clear through to the loop trestle and not further. But I mean, there's no passing there, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. So, I mean, in the extreme, you could create a train which runs from one end of the layout to the other, and the dispatcher would just assign blocks and say, okay, you can go from Elizabeth, which is the interchange yard, to Marietta. And once they're done in Marietta, from Marietta to Tate, from Tate to the next place. I expect that most of the time that's going to be based on passing sidings.
Okay.
on my layout. But again, you know, I don't want it to be too complicated. I want it to be fairly prototypical, but I also want it easy to do. So my operation crews don't have to go through sort of, you know, 3 weeks of college level training before they can run a train.
Yep.
Apologies, by the way, for going a little bit long. Not.
Oh no, we're okay.
Questions.
We always have we sort of say that we've got the extra half hour at the end. For let's see. Looks like we got answers on how to get to the thing. Oops.
Is that okay? I just thought I'd put my face.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I think the rest of the things are JMRI specific.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, the link that you gave us, oh, I see the problem. You might want to look in, let's see. Yeah, I think your link was wrong, or hold on. The link that Burr put up is wrong. It's bit.ly/BRL-OPSIG. But it seems to be. How is it capitalized?
BRL is capitalized, and let me just pull up the presentation.
Yeah.
BRL capitals dash OP, so O capitalized P, S capitalized IG. So let me just try that.
Yeah, it's not working, and normally URLs are case insensitive, so.
Yeah. I tried it out a few times before.
I'll tell you what, if you can get a link and paste it in the chat. Bitly links are case sensitive. Yeah, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It depends on the type of server, but.
Okay, let me just try then. Yeah, no, I'm getting a.
Oh, here we go. We've got it.
You've got it?
Yep. It's big O, little p, big S, little IG. So the one that Burr's got in there last is correct. So we're good.
Okay. So it's exactly is in there, but I'll send that to you for.
Yeah, we'll put it up with everything else. So.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think that's it. There's some people asked about profiles and configurations, and some other people answered. So.
Oh well, I'm no JMRI guru by any means, and if there's one area that I would say is my weakness is working with profiles, etc. I've made a lot of messes there, and one of them was creating a test profile to build a panel and then trying to move it across. So,
but no, I think
others who are better on that.
Yeah, I think we're good. So I'm going to go ahead. So I'm going to thank you for presenting, Stefan.
Okay.
I'm going to stop the recording.